And welcome to tonight's program from the Eckhart Center at Albertus Magnus College. We can all be saints. Saints, Gifts, and Art with the Modern Saints, featuring Gracie Morbitzer. 2 years ago, Shingai Shigwerdere, who is now a Dominican Sister of Peace, led a series on this stage called The Saints Among Us, in which she shared that we are all called to be saints, the best version of ourselves. One of her main insights is that it's important for us to be able to see ourselves in the holy men and women who come before us. They were people, as we are, who faced challenges and difficulties while living as disciples of Jesus in their own ways. The saints among us lead us to recognize that we each have our own saintly path. Tonight's guest is an artist who preaches about the saints through her work. Her icons inspire us to see the saints in new ways, to consider our own call to holiness in this time and place, and to recognize that there are saints among the students, colleagues, and neighbors that we see every day. In her own words, she writes, "The saints experienced every emotion, trial, and joy that we can experience, but they also reached beyond themselves and made their lives and communities so much better and so much more filled with love." Gracie Morbitzer is the founder and artist behind the Modern Saints in Columbus, Ohio. Born into a creative family, she has always been drawn to the arts, storytelling, and crafting curated experiences. At the Columbus College of Art and Design, she received a bachelor's degree in interior architecture and design, studying museums, set design, and immersive experiences. The Modern Saints is a project that was born out of Gracie's transition from a Catholic education to the Columbus College of Art and Design. In the summer of 2021, she decided to leave her job to pursue this project full-time. She now has a studio in the Franklinton Arts District in Columbus, where she works on new commissions, fulfills print orders, and designs special projects to make the saints relatable by bringing them into the current day. And in fact, tonight we have a special treat for you because Gracie will present a new commissioned icon of St. Albert the Great to this community, and then explain some of her process and rationale behind that icon. So we'll have the pleasure of being the first to see one of Gracie's new icons. In 2023, Gracie released her first book, The Modern Saints, Portraits and Reflections on the Saints, and I heard a rumor that she's now working on a second book that she can perhaps answer questions about later. Please join me in welcoming Gracie Morbitzer.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I am really honored to be here and to share my project with you. I'm a little ways from home, from Columbus, Ohio, so it's just really cool to meet a whole new group of faces and hear all of your stories as well. So thanks again. Thanks so much for having me. So a little bit about me. I have my studio as well in Columbus, Ohio, in the Franklinton Arts District, if you've ever been there before. I am always creating or traveling in any sort of way with any sort of media. That's what I do in my free time as well. I did graduate from the Columbus College of Art and Design with a degree in interior architecture and design. That's what I went to school for because I didn't think I could make a living just as an artist, but here I am today. So I'm really happy that that was not what ended up working out, and I can't wait to tell you about that process in my journey as well. But while I was there, I had a museum and set design focus, which is where some of this inspiration comes from. I'm really excited about creating a space that has some sort of really defined theme and that can really transport you somewhere, and I still use that in my process today. And these pictures, these are my husband and my cats, Tater, Tot, Anchovy, and Biff. I love them so much, and they are my good luck charms, so they are in my presentation tonight. So to understand my project, I first want to explain what an icon is and why that's different than just any other type of religious artwork, and why it's so important that we can separate the two. ideas. So the first thing about icons is that you can hear them often referred to as being written rather than painted. This is a really interesting term. It's for a few reasons. The first being that the Eastern European languages where iconography is still widely practiced, this is a better translation of the word into English, but also because icons are supposed to be the visual image of prayers, stories, and messages from the Bible. You can see them without having to be able to read anything. And if you think about early icons, they were used as an education tool for illiterate populations, and they are something that is more elevated than just an image as well, because they're meant to be contemplated. It's something that can take you deeper into prayer, something you can meditate on and with that will help you come up with new ideas about who or what is pictured. And in icons, they also show the person as they are glorified. So this means how they are now that they are in heaven with God. And this is also different than regular religious imagery because it wouldn't show them exactly as they were while they were living on earth. And as far as traditional iconography goes, the way that they would do this, of portraying someone as they would look in heaven, because of course we don't know what that entails exactly, still being on earth, was to have very specific rules as to how they're portrayed. And some of them had to do with the way that they were built, so taller, more columnar shapes, reaching towards heaven. They wouldn't really have any expressions to show how they overcame all of the emotions and trials that they experienced while they were human. And they would have more androgynous faces as well, just trying to look like God and Jesus rather than who they personally were while they were on earth. But the process of creating an icon is also a really strict one. So there's a certain number of paint layers in traditional iconography that you would use. The way that you lay out the shapes and lines of icons can also be really specific. And what I really love about this practice is that every icon is supposed to be a direct copy of a piece that came before it. And this is for a really interesting reason, which is that the first icons we hold to have been divinely created. So if you think of the image of Jesus on Veronica's veil, the cloak sent to the king of Edessa for examples such as this, they appeared on their own and were not created by humans. So if we go back all the way to those pieces in every icon, then they all have a spark of the divine in them. And I think that that is just such a cool aspect of this process in general. So my project began in 2016 when I started school at the Columbus College of Art and Design as a freshman in college, coming from a Catholic school background for my whole life up until that point. It was quite an eye-opening experience. It was a completely different world, but one that I was really excited to be in. I didn't always feel like I had a place or felt completely comfortable when I was in Catholic school. Being a more creative person, thinking outside of the box, was not always really rewarded in those spaces. So it was a new place, but one that I wasn't super afraid of, just more trying to navigate. But, however, my college didn't have, being very small, didn't have any activities or groups that I could join in which I could still continue to express my faith. So I decided that I wanted to at least be able to create a couple pieces for my dorm room that I could have just to remind me of it, to be able to put myself into a prayerful space when I needed to. And this ended up happening when I was at a yard sale looking for art supplies. Being a very broke freshman in college, it's about all I could afford. Luckily, I found a couple of free pieces of wood in a box, and I was so excited to take those because they reminded me of what traditional icons were painted on. At least at the time, I didn't have a very in-depth knowledge of traditional iconography. They were pretty tiny, but I was willing to work with anything at that point. And I decided to take them home and create one image of Jesus and one of Mary. but I had no idea what style to paint these in. So I knew that I didn't always connect with the traditional artwork that I'd grown up with, and also being in a dorm room at an arts college, they wouldn't quite fit in with all of the other modern art posters and interesting things that you would find around a art school dorm room. So I thought for at least a week, I would say, every night trying to figure out what kind of style I wanted to do. I didn't necessarily want to create something new, but it had to be different than what I was used to. So I was so excited to start, however, that I created the image of Jesus, his face and arms, but left him in what basically looked like a white t-shirt for a couple of nights while I tried to figure out how to finish the piece. And the longer I sat with that, the more interested I became in the ideas that came up from just seeing him in this t-shirt like the students around me. And since the whole purpose of icons is to come to some deeper conclusion, come up with new ideas, I found that this was really powerful. And I decided to paint the image of Mary in a similar modern way, looking like these students that were around me. And that was all I was going to do. I had them on my wall. I was good to go. But then I posted an image of them online, and all of my Catholic school friends immediately demanded that I create an image of their favorite saints as well, their patrons, saints that they admired. So I didn't really have a choice at that point, but I'm so glad that that was the case. So I took all of these requests and commissions, started painting more of them, and all on these pieces of discarded wood. And I was still just going to make this be a side project, something that I did while I finished my degree. And then I became an RA, a resident advisor, while I was at CCAD. And while I was in the process of listening to the stories of all of these students that I was responsible for, so many of the things they were saying really reminded me of the stories of the saints. However, it was really hard to share that with them, share these role models with them that I thought could be really inspiring for their own lives and their own stories, because so many of them were hesitant or even fearful when it came to just the topic of faith or religion or spirituality in general, because of being at such a progressive space with so many creative thinkers. A lot of them had been really hurt by folks back home that they knew in the name of religion, or just misunderstood. And they had a lot of questions and a lot of things that they weren't really sure how to process, or weren't really sure if they wanted to hold on to anymore. And so it was really hard to even just get into that dialogue with them. But I realized that one way into that was through these paintings. If I had these saints looking like them, then I would hope that it would be a way for them to realize that there is a place for them in the church if they want there to be. But at the same time, my Catholic school friends and family that I'd grown up with could see these saints looking like these people that they may have judged or hurt on their end of the deal as well, and realize that they may be hurting future saints. So I was hoping there would be something for both groups, and having that goal in mind really enabled me to continue working on this project with all of the strength and determination I needed to balance that on top of a bunch of other jobs and internships and studying for my classes in general. So while I was still there at CCAD, I participated in several art fairs and also got involved in my community. There was a youth group for the diocese that needed a booklet for their walking stations that I was commissioned for. And then I also did all of the necessary work of creating websites, social media, everything I needed to be able to continue with this project at the rate that it was growing, because I was not ready or anticipating the response that it would have. It kind of just blew my mind how many folks were able to connect to it, and really honestly just stunned by it, even in a space as secular as the college art fairs that were just held really for holiday shopping on campus. So what is this project? I have a few rules that I have set down for myself when it comes to creating each of my pieces for this project. And one of the first is that I still decide to paint each piece on repurposed wood, and that's because I see this as a metaphor for the saints themselves. So every piece that I find has either been discarded or traded or sold, not needed for its original purpose anymore, but it did have some life before, and they're all found in different shapes and sizes. They all have previous uses, such as a cutting board or a candle holder or really, really ugly success quote plaques, things like that. And being able to supposedly rescue each of these pieces and transform them into something so that they can now be revered, I see as the process that many of these saints went through in becoming saints as well, with previous lives all in different states of disrepair or having previous jobs, and still bringing all of that to the table for becoming a saint that is now revered, just being transformed in even a small way. I also have decided to make sure that each saint has a real human expression. I mentioned how traditional icons are more expressionless, but I think that at least for this project and for me personally, it's much more impactful to be able to see the saints with the same expressions that we make every day, going through the same things and feeling the same emotions that we have, because then we can realize how human they were and that they did eventually overcome those things, but they did struggle with it. And it's much more hopeful for us to be able to see that and to remember that. And I've also decided to give each one a sense of 21st century clothing. This is not something new. Most of the images that we have in our heads of the saints actually came about in the Renaissance and are wearing Renaissance clothing. So they have been updated before, just not recently. But this is also to be able to relate to them. So if we can see them looking like someone we would know lives next to us, lives in our family, one of the students that we teach, then it's much easier to realize not only that we are like them, but that we can also be future saints too. And that's the other whole part of the deal. It's not just that we can relate to them, but also that we can be them. So I've also decided to make a lot of them portrayed a lot younger than they are in most of the imagery that we have. And this is partially because this project was for the college students around me when it started, but I've decided to continue that because not only is it more historically accurate in a lot of cases because some of these saints were murdered or just did not live in great conditions, didn't live to be very old, but also because we already have plenty of imagery of these saints looking much older that we have in the church, and there's not many of them as younger people, especially saints that we know very well only in their old age, such as Mother Teresa. We can hardly even think what she might have looked like when she was younger, but she was, and she was still doing things that got her to be a saint when she was younger. So that's another way that I hope that young people can realize that they don't have to wait to start doing the things that they want and need to do to be a saint. They don't have to wait for a certain amount of wisdom or age or experience to be able to do what they know their gifts are calling them to do. And at the same time, they can see themselves in these people who may have also still been making mistakes at that age as well, because then they know that they can always have a chance to turn anything around that they need to. The other thing that I make sure, probably most importantly out of these rules that I've set, is to correct the skin tones and features of all of these people that are depicted. I mentioned about how the Renaissance artists painted these saints to look like them, but unfortunately before this time period, in the Dark Ages, when monks were creating icons in monasteries and didn't really get out to see the rest of the world, they firstly may not have known that these saints did not look like them, but secondly, again, they were trying to make them more relatable, to look like the people that they know, the people that they love. Today we know, though, that that does so much harm to erase the identity of these people and who they were, what they lived through. And so this is just this tiniest bit of something that I can do to erase any of the harm that's been done over the years of denying who these people were. If we believe that God created everyone perfectly, then making them represented differently than how they really were just does a disservice to God even because of that. And at the same time, we also don't really get a sense of what they had to go through, what struggles or joys they may have had because of that part of their identity. And it just needs to be changed for historical record as well. There are a few things that I've decided to keep that is in keeping with traditional iconography as well. And this is because I really appreciate the tradition. And there are a lot of really cool, really good, and important aspects to traditional iconography. And I want each of my pieces to have that spark of the divine that I talked about in them as well. So I decided to keep their names in the ancient Greek Koine dialect that's found on a lot of Byzantine icons. This is to, as it's said in traditional iconography, confer the saint's spirit upon the image. It's always the last step and something that's really just like a finishing touch on letting you know who it is that's depicted. I also have decided to leave solid background colors. So since icons are meant to be contemplated, you really don't want a whole lot going on that's distracting in the background. If you do, you might not be able to focus as much on the person and their story. And this is also another way for me to choose just one color that I think really represents who this person would have been. Maybe the energy that they have, that they brought to the world, or something that has to do with the landscape they grew up in. There's a lot of different ways that I can choose that color as well. I've also decided to keep similar poses to some of the traditional icons, and you'll see this in the next few slides when I compare some of my pieces to the traditional pieces. And then I also have decided to keep symbols that represent the saint's story or maybe what they're patron of. So this was a really important part of traditional iconography. If the goal was to have all the saints really looking the same, then you couldn't really tell who was who on the church walls or in the gallery space. So being able to have a symbol that represents something about who that person was, what was important to them, that was a way to not only be able to tell them apart, but to remember what they were known for. So sometimes a symbol of their martyrdom, how they were killed, or something that was just really important to them. So here's a few examples of my icons versus some traditional religious art and icons, and you can see where and how I was inspired by each of them to create the new piece. So in the top corner, we have St. Ignatius of Antioch, who was devoured by lions in the Roman arena. And of course, that is really obviously and gruesomely depicted in the traditional piece. But this is something that I try to work through with each icon, in which this is the case with the traditional pieces. If these are supposed to be images that allow others from both the outside or inside of the faith to have questions, to approach when they may not know much about the saints, then I believe that really gruesome images that were meant to show the saints' strength and bravery can be really scary for some. It's not something that we're used to seeing. They may believe that they could never have the strength to endure lions eating them. And so that is something that I try to, with these pieces, make more accessible to anyone. So instead, we have the symbols of the lion paws on his shirt. He also has a chain around his neck since he was led in chains to the Roman arena. And instead of being in the act of devouring and still standing strong, he just has a very strong and brave expression on his face as well. He also looks more like a person you would find living in Antioch today. And the colors all came from some of the parts of his story as well, from the journey that he had to take across land to get to the arena rather than by sea, which was normal. In the other top corner, we have the Immaculate Heart of Mary. You can see where I took sort of the color palette from this traditional piece. That's another way that I can choose the colors sometimes. And you can see that instead of having the heart glowing out of her chest, it's more of a symbol on her jacket instead. And this, again, is another accessibility piece to someone who is not used to seeing imagery such as this. It's more approachable to be able to ask questions and answer questions when they're not seeing something that is supernatural happening that they are just intimidated by. She still has a very caring and loving expression, but looks more like she probably would have historically. And in this image, she has longer curly hair and is looking just sort of defiantly to the side. So in each of my Mary images, I really try to portray her as a very different looking person. I know that Mary is so many things to so many people, and so the fact that she has so many titles that are so vastly differing from each other gives me so many opportunities to create these images of her being who she is to others, whether that's a really strong mother protecting her children, or whether that's someone who is appreciating the beauty of flowers and a May crowning image, or someone who is comforting and mother-like in Our Lady of Guadalupe. In the bottom corner, we have St. Augustine. This is one where, unfortunately, because of the art that has come down throughout the years, I'm not actually able to keep much of the traditional piece in mind because of the rules that I've set for myself. In my piece, he looks more as he would have, being from Northern Africa. He also has a very studious kind of sweater on, since he was known as an intellectual and a writer. And he also has blonde highlights in his hair, which is one of my favorite parts. Since they're only on the ends, I like to think that they're a remnant from his more wild youth that he's just letting grow out at this point. And then in the other bottom corner, we have St. John the Baptist, who is always pictured very thin and with a lot of hair. So hopefully you'd be able to tell that just from seeing my piece if you hadn't seen the traditional. But even if not, he's in also a very similar pose, and he has a tattoo of a shell, which is a symbol of baptism, and then one of a cross as well. Here's a few more examples. In the top corner, we have St. Hildegard of Bingen, who's one of my most favorite saints, known for creating everything from medicinal remedies to operas and plays and songs and writing and painting, and then going on speaking tours and letting authority know when they messed up. She broke so many barriers for women as well, which is why she has the female symbol tattoo on her wrist. She also has herbs in her pocket, symbolic of the gardening and medical study that she did. She has an earbud in her ear for the compositions that she wrote, and a pen for the writing and art that she created. As you can see in the traditional piece, however, there are flames over her eyes, which are pretty much always there to be symbolic of the visions that she had. Of course, we wouldn't walk outside today and hopefully not see flames over someone's eyes. So again, to be more accessible, she has instead a flame-colored eyeshadow. In the other top corner, we have St. Juan Diego, who is known for having the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe show up on his clothing when he needed to convince the bishop that she really had appeared to him and asked him to build her a church. So you can see in the original piece and in mine that they're, again, sort of the same color scheme, even sort of the same pose. He has almost the same hair as well, just a 21st century version of it. He also has roses falling out of his shirt because of the other part of the miracle with roses appearing in the winter, just to further convince the bishop that he was correct. In the bottom corner, we have St. Denis, who has an almost comical, gruesome martyrdom story about having been preaching while Christianity was still illegal. He was beheaded for it and picked up his head to continue preaching for another several miles. Unfortunately, most traditional artwork is very gruesome when it comes to depicting him. This statue that I found is the least terrifying one that I could find, honestly, which is saying something. There's blood gushing out occasionally. And again, that's just not very accessible to audiences who have no experience in this, have no idea about his story or why this was important to early Christians. So instead, much mirroring this traditional sculpture, I have him with the same sort of expression, but just in a turtleneck, so you can't really tell what's going on underneath his chin. Thankfully. And then in the other bottom corner, we have St. Thomas More, who was best friends with Henry VIII. until he betrayed his friendship, unfortunately, to be able to make his own laws, and Thomas stood up to him for it, was killed for it. But you can see that in these pieces, again, it's very similar color schemes, and he even has the same style of clothing on with the several layers. However, the fur vest is now more of a hoodie, and his large medallion is more of a smaller necklace. So what does this project do? First of all, as I've mentioned, it shows us how much we are like the saints, but also that they were like us. Anything that we can go through, anything we can struggle with, there's a saint that's done it before. As I mentioned as well, both groups of friends could get something out of it, I hoped. Deeper reflection, if they were already in the church and maybe had done some judgment of others, or hope if they were outside of it and were looking for a way to get in. I also hope that this project can help us realize the sometimes hidden diversity of the church. We forget, because of this imagery that we have sometimes, that saints were from all over the world, from every time period, every place, every type of community. And not only were they diverse in where they were from, but also in what they were skilled at, in what their talents were, in what they were passionate about. There's a reason why we have a different patron saint for everything you can think of, and that's because they were all so different from each other. And sometimes we can forget those ideas and perspectives that they had, because over the years, if you know the idea of the single story, we can start to just have one opinion or one idea or one story about them that gets told over and over, and we can forget, without being able to go back and learn about their whole story over again, that they may have had different ideas than what we previously thought. And then also, there is a place for all of us in this faith, and we can all be saints. So why is this important? The first thing is that there have been many university studies done that show us that no matter who you are or what your background is, the way that you picture those that you think are most important and most holy and have the most power, such as God and Jesus and the saints for many of us, the way that you picture them is subconsciously the way that you're going to imagine those in our society will also be, if they are the ones that have the most power and the most holiness. And unfortunately, that does a whole lot of harm. So if we only have imagery of Jesus and God and the saints as older white folks, particularly men as well when it comes to God, then subconsciously we're going to take in those images, since that's all we've been presented, and picture them ourselves in that way. And that would mean that those are the folks that we think in our society should have that power. And that does so much harm, because, of course, we all know that we're all human. We all have just as much intellect and capacity and can have as much power as the other and be as smart as the other and have the same talents as each other. And so this is just such a harmful way to have those images in our heads be created. So being able to create some art that is different than that is, in the smallest way, hopefully, undoing some of that. It's also because the church in particular has been the source of so much harm in general over the years, through things such as missions that were harmful to the indigenous communities, and residential schools, and just cultural erasure in general when missions took their words and faith to other places. And so starting in a place like the church to get to that goal of the end of the university studies I mentioned is the smallest way that we can start to do that. Of course, the society in general has a much larger problem with it, and it needs to be in all areas of our society. But because the church in particular has this history of erasing identities, trying to bring that the identities of some of these folks back into it is a way that we can start to undo some of that. And then also because, as I mentioned, these icons originally were teaching tools. And so this is a way to evangelize as well. You know, if it's an image that can prompt questions to get someone thinking about things in a new way, that's what they were always meant for. And that's what I hope that these can do as well. Also, by having this project around, I hope that we can realize our own gifts and callings. Just learning in general that there were so many saints can be a good start to that. But then when you realize how different they all were and how they didn't all do the same things, then we can start to realize that we don't have to all do the same things as well. And in fact, we're not supposed to and not called to. We're supposed to use the gifts that we have. And then seeing how many saints there are for things that you wouldn't even think relate to faith and living for your faith in general can also help you realize some of those gifts you may not have realized you can use for that. And then lastly, I hope that it can help us understand how to make the church a home for all. So not only are they helpful to help us realize this for ourselves, but that even if there are some saints that we don't particularly agree with or understand, that's actually a good thing, because then we can realize that those who we don't agree with or understand around us also still have the possibilities of being able to be saints. So the saints and gifts. So as I mentioned, just as the saints were made for their time, place, and situations they were born into, your skills and talents and passions are necessary for your own situations. We've all heard the passage from Paul about each part of the body being necessary and how it wouldn't function if one part were to wish to be another part or not do its own job. And the saints, I think, are the best example of this, again, because they were all so different from each other and were really meant for their time and place in which they were born and couldn't have fulfilled the job of another at a different time and place. There's this quote from St. Hildegard of Bingen that I really love, which is, "God created the humankind so that humankind might cultivate the earthly and thereby create the heavenly." And this is really saying that the world needs what you are, because when you are able to live in the way that you know who you are, and when you are able to use those gifts that you have, you really bring heaven to earth, and that's all of our goals. So being authentic to those gifts and to who you are can bring that here. And then also sharing these gifts that you have with others is a way of giving back to God and thanking God for those gifts as well. And then there's just a couple of other reasons why I think the saints are just so cool. The first is that there's not one way to be a Christian, and they show us this as well. So we've been talking a lot about how there's not just one way to be a saint, but there's also just not one way to be a Christian as well. They had so many forgotten ideas, as I mentioned, with the risk of the single story coming down through the years about who they were and what they believed in. When we forget some of their other ideas, going back and relearning them can expand our own views. One of the things that I think is so interesting is when saints lived at the same time and place, if they knew each other, sometimes they didn't get along, and you wouldn't expect that to happen when they're supposed to be the holiest in our society, but they just didn't see eye to eye or have similar ideas. And I think that that gives us so much hope, too, for our own ideas that we think may not have a place to fit in. And then they were also the original social justice advocates. We forget sometimes, because of this traditional imagery that we have of them looking very clean and put together in these robes, holding flowers, we forget that they were literally healing the sick and walking from town to town to proclaim their mission. They're never portrayed as dirty as they probably would have been, or as on the ground as they probably would have been, or looking as realistic and human. And that can help us forget that sometimes, which is something we always want to be able to remember. And then lastly, their feasts, and being able to have a calendar of feast days for every day of the year can remind us on a regular basis of what matters most and what we can do to continue their work. So something I always really like to do on my social media accounts with this project is to share each saint's feast day and give some tips on what we could do. There's really basic, really easy things that we could do that day to continue that saint's work. They're really simple ideas. You don't have to be a saint to be able to do them, but they are what the saint held important to themselves and what they thought would change the world, and I think that they can too. So we have, at this point, a new icon that I'd like to show off for you all of St. Albert the Great, and then I can talk a little bit about the creative choices behind it as well.
Dr. Camille is receiving this icon on behalf of the Albertus Magnus College community.
Thank you. Yeah, of course.
So, okay, first of all, there's a blue background. That's our school color. We love that, Gracie. But as I was listening to you reflect on your work, it strikes me that what you have done through your artistry is what we aspire to at Albertus Magnus in so many ways. I mean, you have embraced notions of creativity, faith, imagination, spirituality, contemplation, and all of those are elements of what we seek to instill and inspire in our students. But it reminds me perhaps of something you may not be aware of, and I think that this speaks to the contemplation and imagination that the Dominican sisters had when they founded Albertus. They named it for Albert the Great. But in 1925, he had not yet been canonized. And I learned that after a few years when I had started. I was not aware. But the fact that the sisters had the imagination, the faith, contemplation, and to identify Albert as the patron, the namesake for Albertus Magnus before he had been canonized is particularly meaningful to us. And so for you to translate Albert in a way that I think all of our community members, being as diverse as we are at Albertus, will see Albert in ourselves is a special gift to us, and especially as we prepare for the 100th anniversary of Albertus. So on behalf of everybody here, I extend great gratitude to you and congratulations on an amazing job. So thank you very much. Yeah,
Thank you so much. I am so glad that you are taken with it. I really wanted it to be something great for everyone here if possible. So here it is, a little larger, if you can't see it from the back. So some of the choices behind it, of course he has the falcon, which was not only for your school logo, but for his family history, being falconers themselves, and also for the scientific research that he did on birds and animals in general. I heard also that an important part of why you have him as your patron is because he was known to refuse carriages and instead walk from town to town to take care of those that he was in charge of taking care of in his district. And because of that, he's holding a modern hiking boot. He also has very iconic hat and cape that are black, that are shown in many images of him. This was a really difficult thing to translate into modern style. I always really struggle with that when saints are known for wearing something really particular that no one would ever wear in the 21st century. So instead, he has this black sort of interestingly shaped jacket on, as well as a hat. Not quite the same shape, but hopefully evoking the same silhouette, the same sort of basic shapes in general. He also has historic scientific tools as tattoos on his arm, as well as stars that are also shown in many traditional pieces of him for his work in studying space and the stars in general. And then the colors that I used, actually, I did not know that your colors were blue when I created this. They actually come from a lot of European contemporary art, architecture, and fabric from the time in which he lived. And his expression is one that I hope shows some curiosity and determination. These are the two things that I thought were most important when it came to his character and who he was. I mentioned how I want every expression to be shown in my icons, but I think these are what was most important to him in general. And then just for a little bit of a sneak peek into the process, I also included an inspiration board of some of the images that I looked at when I was working on this piece. And then you can see actually in the top corner that one of them is round, and that's sort of where I came up with the idea of choosing a piece that was round for this icon. Again, being able to hearken back to these traditional aspects of historical work of specific saint are always really important to me. And then that also comes from, again, these instruments that he would have used and the globes as well. They're all around, and I think that was really what stood out to me most and what was most inspiring for picking that shape. So to wrap everything up, I hope that after hearing about this project, you can be able to see the people around you, especially those you may have hurt or judged, as saints. What does that do for you, and how does that change your perspective? My second challenge is to be able to understand how flawed and real all these people who are now so revered within the church were. And then what does that mean for us? And then lastly, to understand the diversity of the ideas, lives, goals, and gifts of the saints. And then we have some time for Q&A.
That's right. Please join me in thanking Gracie. We've got lots of time for Q&A and then also insights. And I will mention that this opportunity is available to those online as well. One of our anonymous staffers is currently monitoring the chat and will relay any questions or comments from the chat to the room. And as a result, I ask that if you ask a question in the room, please make sure that you have the microphone so that those on the live stream can hear you.
You mentioned that all of the wood is reused. So I am interested to know what this was before it became this icon.
Yes, that's a good question. I don't actually know what that was. It has a Target label on the back, so I'm guessing it's some kind of home decor. I'm thinking like a charger for a table, like not quite a tray, but I'm sure you could put some of those decorative like moss things in it. That's what I'm guessing.
From one of our people online, they're just saying they saw your work at the Martin de Porres Center in Columbus. Mm-hmm. It's even more beautiful in person. So if you get to Columbus, try to seek out some place where her work is. And another is, I am so impressed with your knowledge of church history, scripture, and theology, as well as sensitivity to social justice. How did you prepare yourself to do this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I, up until not as long ago as you would think, still didn't know the whole background of traditional iconography and all of the aspects that go into it. So once I was really able to learn about that, though, I think it really informed my current process of deciding what rules to establish when it comes to creating each new piece. And I also just make sure that I do so much research before every piece. There's so much that goes into it. I make sure to write the biography of each saint before I depict them so that I can have a real grasp of who they were and everything that we know about them. And also just opinions that are out there about them, whether they're positive or negative. So just being able to have this background, I think, really informs every creative choice that I make that goes into each piece. But I also just try to really understand why these choices were made. Again, I mentioned how I respected traditional iconography, and so being able to learn about all the decisions for it have helped me be able to keep that respect rather than just wishing that things were different and more like the way that I depict saints as well. I see the value to it, and the only way to get to that point is knowing the history of it. So many of my opinions and thoughts have changed about certain saints and just the saints in general since starting this project because of the research. When I was in school, there's only so much you can cover in religion class, so a lot of things just got kind of glossed over, or maybe they're not parts of our history that we want to remember, and so they just weren't mentioned. So being able to relearn everything has been a big part of preparing as well.
I had a chance to look at your website before coming to this, and one of the images that really struck me was your image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And I found it interesting that on the San Juan Diego that you have here, you still use the traditional for the modern one that you depicted. Was there a reason why you didn't go with your more modern Our Lady of Guadalupe in that particular?
Yeah, so part of it was kind of logistical. I actually created the Juan Diego first and didn't really have a vision yet for how I would create the accompanying Our Lady of Guadalupe. But part of it was also because, and I've had comments before from those who maybe don't appreciate this work that I do, that the I guess you would say, like, the saints, if they were around today, they wouldn't exactly probably be wearing what I show them wearing. And again, that's their opinion. They're entitled to their opinion, not my opinion. But by showing them looking like our present day, it's not only taking them into the present day, but also reminding us of those who look like that person that's just depicted in the icon, whether or not it has something to do with the saint in general. And so I really wanted him to look like someone you might see today in Mexico City walking around, and probably the shirts that they would have would be the traditional Our Lady on there, and being able to just take that one aspect of something we're really familiar with in our culture and translate that to him in the icon. That's kind of the idea behind that one. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Gracie, so we've seen the final product of your imagination, and you shared with us some of the inspiration. I'm just curious, when, at least in the case of St. Albert, when you first put, whether it was pencil to paper, brush to paper, pen, where did you start? Like, where did you start that led you to this finished product?
So I have a really complicated process, so I'm really glad you asked about it because I have a lot to say. So my process always starts with the research, as I mentioned. It could sometimes be a whole week, up to a whole week of research on the particular person if there's a lot of information out there about them. And then I decide to come up with first visual references. So sometimes that will be a bunch of images of someone who lives in the country now where that person lived. Sometimes it'll be images of people I know that remind me of that saint. So really just coming up with all of these different images, not only of their expression and their skin tone and their hair, but also style. So I try to find fashion that I think they would be wearing, ways to incorporate their traditional symbols into something they would be wearing. We wouldn't see a saint walking around carrying a whole church just on the sidewalk, so incorporating that church somehow into a pin or jewelry or a tattoo, something like that. Making all of these decisions based on how to take as much of the traditional as possible and translate it into the modern. So that whole process can take quite a while. Sometimes I have an idea right away. And then after that, creating a space. So I really like to separate myself as much as I can, like a traditional iconographer would, while they create the piece. That's really hard to do in our current day and age. So one of the ways that I do this is by just really trying to get into the mindset of who is this person and what would their life have been like and what was important to them. So I do everything from creating a playlist of music I think they would listen to if they were around today, to what I wear, to what I bring for lunch, what candle I have going, all of that. Just really something to do with who they were, the life they lived, where they were from. And that really helps me. As I mentioned, being in interior design, spaces are just really important to me, and that really helps me get into this mindset of being focused on who I'm creating an image of and what's important to them. And then also just being able to, like traditional iconography as well, see it as a very meditative process, saying prayers and making sure that I have time for contemplation just throughout with the piece. All of that is really important to the process as well. So I start the actual physical painting of it, usually by drawing directly on the piece. I don't usually do a sketch beforehand. I used to originally, and then especially at that time, just hardly ever having painted before because I never had any formal classes or anything, not being in school for painting. I would get so frustrated that it wouldn't turn out looking like the sketch or even just the image in my head. I just wasn't a exact enough artist to be able to reproduce that. And I would get so frustrated and work on things for days and rework things. But I realized over the years as I continued to paint these that the ones that I sort of just let be whatever they're going to be are the ones that I enjoy the most. And I really see that as the Spirit guiding me in that direction, not being bound to this whatever human version of it that I could come up with on my own. So at this point, I really do try to just sort of let it go and just draw what I'm going to have on the piece already and go from there. Yeah, and then I start with really thin layers of acrylic. Traditional icons would use egg tempera, really thin, to let the light come through, and then also to make it more of a contemplative process because it's really frustrating to have to build up layer after layer, and it takes a lot longer. So I still am able to do that by using like really thin acrylic paint on the piece as well. For both aspects, letting the light shine through it to illuminate it, and then also to make it more of a longer process as well for building it up. And then at the end, I do the border line, which is also traditional to Byzantine icons, and then add their name on there as well in the closest that I can get to it in the Koine Greek. And that one is exact. I did double check, so we're good.
Hi, I have another question, but before this, so there's a St. Albert the Great playlist that's on your Spotify?
It hasn't been released yet, but it is there.
But it is there. Okay, just keep us in the loop if that's available. My question is, I'm so taken by so much of your art, and art that I've shown other people at times, sometimes, you don't know what the reaction is going to be from everybody that sees it. How have you dealt as an artist with people that say, oh, that's pushing too far, or I feel uncomfortable with some part of the depiction that you have created?
That is a really great question. So especially when I first started, while I was still in art school, trying to sell prints at these art fairs where it was really just, holiday shoppers looking for last-minute gifts, I definitely had a lot of, blank stares and just kind of walking by quickly. But when I did get super negative comments, it did always just seem like I was really struggling because it was too religious of a project for secular spaces, like at my art school, but also too secular for religious spaces. I mean, I would try to contact youth groups and ministries, and they just would not be interested, So really online is where I found the community finally that was really waiting for something like this. And it's still just so exciting for me today that there are still so many who find it and get excited about it, because I thought I was alone in doing this, and being able to find them has also helped me find other artists who are doing the same thing, and that's really hopeful for me too. But still, at the same time, I do get plenty of social media comment attacks pretty frequently, and that is really disheartening for me as an artist. I don't really know that there's any way to not let that bother you. You know, you put your whole life and spirit into creating these things, so anything that's negative about it is gonna hurt. But really, most of the comments are about just not agreeing with my choices, and as an artist, that's always the problem, you know. It's all subjective, and at the end of the day, I do remember that. But at the same time, I'm appreciative, honestly, that there are some who are a bit upset about it, because I know that it's doing something. You know, if it wasn't actually a new idea or something that hadn't been thought of before, then there probably wouldn't be any problems with it, you know. So yeah, it can be really difficult, but I'm honestly really thankful for it, because that keeps me on my toes too. You know, I have to know the history and the tradition of all of it to be able to come back with my own defense, and to be able to support the choices that I make. So yeah, it's hard. It really is, and I do get a lot of negativity every once in a while, but the fact that it can be something that is so good and meaningful for so many means I'm going to keep doing it forever. It's more important. Yeah.
I have a related question. This is based on what you just said about finding your community online, but also based on something you told students earlier today. Gracie met with several of our classes. And that is that earlier today you said you were surprised at how much online work and publicity are a part of your art process. So the digital world is an important component, but the art itself you're creating in a radically analog way. Mm-hmm. So how do you see the relationship between real life and virtual life to make a false division? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, that's really tough too. I definitely don't prefer the amount of time each month that I have to spend creating social posts versus actually painting, but it's more than you would expect as an artist. Managing websites and emails and everything is most of how I spend my time. And while it's not what I'm like itching to do, you know, I know that it's so necessary to be able to build that community, to be able to maintain that community and share it with those who need to find it. And so I really see that as like the ministry part of this, of like outreach, of being able to maintain relationships with those who are interested in what I'm doing, and then also be inspired by them as well. Again, be able to hear their stories and hear their suggestions, and find out which saints are most important to them that they may want commissioned eventually. Yeah, I think it's as an artist, you don't have anything without an audience, you know, so you need to be able to maintain that good relationship with them as well. And you also wouldn't be inspired without them either. So, yeah, I mean, it's really cheesy, but all of you are what make me keep doing this. So I need to be able to have that connection as well. It's, again, not what I'm used to, but I know it's very necessary, and it's cool to be able to connect. It's a very solitary life as an artist, so that community is so important.
Okay, I have a question. So as your audience, I am drawn right to this man's eyebrows. And what it brought up for me was the description of St. Paul in Acts of the Apostles, where he has a unibrow, and he's short, and he's got bow legs. He probably didn't really look like that, but he had bow legs because they wanted to depict him as having been rich. So if he had bow legs, he had a horse. If he had a unibrow, he was intelligent, because that's just laying right across his forehead. Mm-hmm. How do you look at, because you're looking at some very ancient icons, how do you bring that into your picture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some of that has to do with making sure that their features are more correct to the time and place they would have lived in. Like we think about, it's very easy to be able to correct a skin tone, because that's just a shade of paint. But we don't realize, too, that even if you just correct a skin tone, a person may still not look like where they came from. So sometimes it's just those decisions, but sometimes it is really figuring out what was so important to them. So, for example, my St. Benedict icon was a commission for someone who thought that their favorite part of his story and who he was that he was a lover of words. He was always like listening, and music was important to him, and just hearing what others were saying. So for that, I decided to have him in profile so that you can just see his ear like really large, and that's like the center of the image, like that's the most important aspect. And sometimes they may have like really dark or bold lips because they were a speaker and that was what was most important to them. So yeah, sometimes like you were mentioning, traditionally, the features that are highlighted the most do have something to do with what I want to say about them and who I think that they were. For Albert, in general, it is kind of what you were saying about how he was just thoughtful and he's pondering a project and you really want to be able to see him thinking. So that was sort of where that idea came from. I also really randomly had a comment the last time I gave a presentation about how a lot of my saints have really big noses, and I never really noticed that before. That's not something I was trying to do, but I actually really appreciate it because something that a lot of the traditional artwork of saints does is paint them in this like perfect like supermodel light, just to show that they were maybe perfect in mind rather in spirit rather than but just showing that physically because that's the only way to show that. But I think, again, that makes them really unrelatable to us. It doesn't show who they really were, who they might have actually been. It doesn't let everyone who's a regular person, which is everyone, realize that they can be as well.
We have time for one more question. Two more questions.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Is this working? Yeah. So I just was brought into contact with a comment, a dictum, let's say, of Meister Eckhart, who was one of Albert's students that came to me via Edward. But he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, the mystery of your life is you must always radiate God. And I connected this in my mind with the need we have to avoid the temptation of containing God, possessing God, thinking we've captured it. And that's something Meister Eckhart is really good about. He says, as soon as you say God and you think you have it, you don't have it. And avoiding containing God also relates to your project of not putting them all on the same pedestal. So this is the uniformity and no diversity, because if we're all to radiate God, that means God is being radiated in every single human person in unfathomable amount of diversity. So that's why I appreciate your work so much. It's so creative, and it's also a beautiful ministry. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And Edward and I were actually talking last night, too, about how some saints really didn't want to be seen as saints because of the way that their legacies get passed down and changed over the years. So I think that goes along with what you're saying, too, about how they might not want to be depicted the way they were depicted either because they didn't feel they were perfect and wouldn't want to be seen that way either. Thank you.
Hi. So I really enjoy your artwork. I think it's really amazing to see how the saints would have looked in our modern lives. So I was wondering, like, the positive impact that your art has made, how long did it take for you to start, like, seeing that in society?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the first year that I had a website, In the entire calendar year, I sold one print, and it was to someone I knew from high school. So I'm not even sure that counted. She probably just didn't have my number anymore or something like that. So it definitely took a while. But I think that, honestly, one of the things that was a catalyst for being able to share more of this work was COVID and all of the social changes that we were seeing during those years. All of a sudden, I think folks who never thought about social justice before were starting to get really interested in it and wanted examples, physical examples of images that they could see on a regular basis to remind them of what their goals were, or role models who had done these things that they wanted to do in the past, to be able to remind them of that. So I would say that really, I guess, started the path of me being able to see this art even just in the world in general. But yeah, it took quite a while. I would say that 2021 is the year that I was able to go full-time with this project. And that was, again, sort of a leap of faith because the job I was working at was about to lay everyone off, and I decided to take a chance. It wasn't something that I anticipated ahead of time being able to do. So even then, I still wasn't sure that it was something that was going to hold on. So yeah, I mean, I would say it took quite a few years. It's been 5 years now since I graduated, so about 9 years total that I've been working on this, and it's been that whole time, really, honestly. But it's just really cool, and it's a project that has changed in its audience as well too. So I think at first it was more individuals, more commissions from individuals who just had a special connection to saints, and now really interesting, and also what's really exciting is that a lot of them are for ministries, youth groups, and churches themselves, schools, and that's just really cool for me too, because it'll be in a space where learning is happening and where ideas are always being generated, and hopefully they'll be part of that. Yeah, thank you.
One of our faculty members tuning in from online says, "Thank you, Gracie. The icons are fascinating. You are so talented. Loved the icon of St. Albert the Great. Your narration was beautiful." I think she speaks for all of us in saying so. So everybody, please join me in thanking our guest.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
There are so many people to thank because an event like this takes the whole college to put on. First of all, thank you to my colleagues in Dominican Mission and Ministries, Sister Ann, Sister Kathy, and our anonymous online monitor, Sister Susan. Thank you to the President's Office for being supportive in pursuing this commission, especially as we approach our centennial year. Thank you to facilities for turning around the room so quickly. Thank you to Professors Sheck and Frattini for bringing students to hear Gracie earlier today. And thank you to Eddie from IT for managing the live stream for us. I hope that all of you join us for future Meister Eckhart events. Professor Bourgeois mentioned some of Meister Eckhart's ideas. If that was intriguing to you, next Thursday in this room, we will be serving a full free dinner featuring a conversation between me and Mark Esperos, an eminent scholar of Meister Eckhart, and an adapter of Eckhart's thought into poetry. You're all invited. You can find out more at albertus.edu/Eckhart/events. On that page, you can also sign up for our mailing list and see information about future events. Thank you very much to everybody for joining us in person and online. Thank you to our guests. We'll see you next time. Have a good night.